Though I love the escapism of a good science fiction movie, the genre is never on more shaky ground than when it suggests that there is some way that human beings can travel faster than the speed of light, whether that's through a warp drive or hyperspace, or the really dumb things that some movies use, like going through a black hole. A body with such great mass that even light cannot escape its gravitational pull, which, if approached, would reduce a spaceship and several hundred crew members to a small, dense object smaller than the point of a pin. Time doesn't really exist. Time is just what we perceive because things move in relation to each other. If every molecule and atom suddenly stopped moving, we would say that time had come to a stop, that there would be no more time. Though fiction writers from H.G. Wells to modern comic books have talked about going back in time, there is no such thing. Even if you could make every atom and every molecule and every planet and star simultaneously retrace their steps going backwards, it still wouldn't be going back in time. The concept is itself meaningless. When physicists like Einstein and Hawking speak of variances in the fabric of space and time or the possibility of time travel, what they are talking about is going into the future, but it's still not what they try to make you think about in the movies. The faster a thing moves, the slower the atoms in that thing move. So if you approach the speed of light, it is as if time were slowing to a near stop. If we could shoot a rocket at light speed around the Earth and make it fly for 10 years, when it landed, the people on Earth would have aged for 10 years, and the person on the spaceship would have aged less than a second. Of course, the people on the spaceship would also be dead, because speed increases mass. At 90% the speed of light, your weight would double, which those of us who have been counting calories for 30 years, we don't really want to go that fast. But after the 90% mark, the increase in mass picks up quite a bit. So if you got to 92 or 93%, you would then weigh several tons. Before you got to light speed, you would have an infinite weight, and again, you would be about the size of the point of a pin. It would kill you instantly, so it's just not a good plan to go that fast. I don't know if you'd plan to do that during your spring break, but don't. So while time travel is hypothetically possible going into the future, it's completely impractical if you're talking about human beings doing it. We are prisoners of time. We cannot go back, and we cannot meaningfully go forward any faster than we're going forward right now. Now, time may seem to slow down in church, but that's just a perception. We get 1 minute at a time. We are mortals, and we are given a few years of productive adult life. Some get more than others, but not any of us get very many, really. When you think about it, life isn't very long. That's what caught my attention when I read Reinhold Niebuhr's very matter-of-fact assertion that nothing that is worth doing can be completed in our lifetime. We can all dispute the nature of that claim, especially those of us who believe that we have successfully raised absolutely remarkable children from childhood into adult life. I can think of a few fairly substantial projects that I've seen from inception to successful completion. But if we just let Niebuhr's saying stand as it is, especially now, right now, when it seems like the news is coming at us so fast, and it's all bad, it's almost all bad news, and it just seems insurmountable. We may see the Affordable Care Act repealed in the next week. and I will add my voice in protest to all those who are screaming with their hair on fire as we watch this happening. I just want to say, as bad as it is, even this is not the last word. It's like Garrison Keillor said about a cat that's trapped on top of a tall fence by a pack of mean dogs. The cat's pretty cool about it because he knows that all he has to do is be patient, and all this barking and jumping and gnashing of teeth will not be the last word. Not many of us could ever live to be 100 years old, but let me remind you what 100 years can mean in human history. 100 years ago, the average life expectancy was 47. In 1917, more than 90% of our so-called doctors had never been to college. There were no antibiotics. You could, however, go to the corner apothecary and buy either heroin or morphine, which I guess helped you cope with a lot of things, and they said that heroin helped to clear up your complexion. Nothing worth doing can be completed in our lifetime. Now, my parents were born at home. They carried water from a well. They used an outhouse. They did their homework by lamplight, and they attended a one-room school. The world changes, but not at a predictable pace, and the changes are not always in the direction of progress. 100 years ago, for all the other things that I cited that were obviously quite primitive, 100 years ago, there were only about 200 murders a year in the United States. Simpler times, but remarkably less violent. Still, pneumonia was the leading cause of death, followed by tuberculosis and, forgive me for saying it, diarrhea. I believe that in the next 100 years, we will see substantial changes. I believe that in 100 years, I know everybody's obsessing about the next 4, but I believe in the next 100 years, we will have all renewable energy resources. I believe that we will have solved the social ills of homelessness and hunger. I believe that by then, we will have universal health care, and that it will be much better health care than what we have now. I believe that our cars will drive themselves, cutting traffic fatalities by more than 90%, and allowing the elderly to continue to live independently without waiting for their too busy grown-up kids to come and take them somewhere. Of course, most of what life will be like in those decades, many years after I'm gone, are not even within the realm of our ability to predict or even imagine. But the big stuff I can imagine. I can imagine a healthier planet, and I can imagine a much more just society. The trick is that there are a lot of ups and downs on the way to getting there, and it won't happen in my lifetime. It won't happen in your lifetime. But, and here's the kicker, that shouldn't keep us from doing it. The fact that it won't benefit us is not what matters. That's the part that's hard to communicate to anyone who doesn't already see it. These steps towards progress need to happen even though they will never benefit me and might not benefit my daughter, but I hope will benefit her children. It is that lovely concept of planting trees whose shade you will never sit under. This is the philosophical problem around all of the Affordable Health Care Act debate. How can you explain to Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan that they should care about other people? And if you don't get it, how do you explain it to someone? That is the bottom line problem in most of our public ethics debates. About 15 years ago, when I was about the only pastor in town who gladly officiated over same-sex weddings, a group of conservatives in my former church hired a private detective to go out and find my gay lover. They must have paid that guy, his name was John Snow, he's deceased now, But they must have paid him more than $50,000 because he followed me for 8 months, went through my garbage, interrogated former employees and ex-girlfriends, before finally giving up and accepting that though I don't appear to be a very successful heterosexual, I'm not a homosexual. What those people who hired Jon Snow could not understand was why anyone would risk their career, their reputation, and in some instances their safety to advocate for an oppressed minority of which I was not a part. The ability to feel empathy, to show compassion, that's what defines a spiritual life. In many ways, that popular internet meme that says conservatives don't get involved in things that haven't happened to them, liberals get involved in because it shouldn't happen to anyone. It's the ability to empathize that makes the difference between an entirely secular life and a spiritual life. Now, I think that perspective can be learned. I think it can. Otherwise, preaching doesn't make much sense, does it? So I'm going to hold on to the belief that people can change, that you can teach empathy and compassion. But what I know for sure is that you can't do it very fast, that people don't change this way very quickly. But I'm afraid that it can also be unlearned. I have seen it because cynicism can paralyze a formerly generous heart. You can lose enough battles, you can get enough negative input that you can stop feeling and stop caring. I think that people can take enough beatings in the public forum that they will retreat into self-interest and public indifference. And it's up to us to try our best to keep that from happening, either to ourselves or to our community. Niebuhr also claimed that nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Now, I've raised the money for and chaired 14 Habitat for Humanity projects in the city of Springfield. 14 families in Springfield live in homes of their own that are now entirely paid for, so they're owned by the occupants. And I'm proud of that, but it wasn't all my money that built those 14 houses, and it sure wasn't my construction skills. They let me put insulation in between the rafters. That's as much construction as the crew people would let the preacher do. Some painting, if it was like in places that no one would ever see. I've painted the inside of utility closets and things like that. It took an entire community of compassionate people to build those houses. I chaired a drive to build 200 houses for the rural poor in Nicaragua. And a picture of a hillside in Matagalpa covered with those little houses sits at the foot of my bed, and that effort continues to be the greatest source of pride in my ministry. But I only paid for one of those houses. I mixed some mortar, carried it in buckets on my shoulder, carried concrete blocks up a mountainside in the rain. But I was just one among many who sacrificed to get those houses built. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. If we set out to do any great thing, we have to do it as a community. Amen. My single greatest complaint about liberals is that we have a hard time ever sticking together long enough to get anything done. As long as management can keep their workforce fighting with each other, there'll never be a strong labor union. As long as the rich can keep poor whites fighting with poor blacks and poor Latinos, no one will ever look up the economic ladder to see who's actually turning the crank of the organ grinder. As long as progressive religious folk keep dissecting one another in petty ego battles, then the monstrous prejudices and greed that has ushered in the most dangerous government ever seen in this republic will continue to rule. Excuse me. But that administration didn't get my vote, and they won't get my surrender either. And I hope they won't get yours. Together, we can eventually change the world as long as we can realize that it isn't all for us or about us. Amen.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.